Hey everybody, welcome to Get Ready With Me and Talk About Stuff. My name is Stephanie, and this show is just about me getting ready and talking about stuff. If you're new to this channel, welcome. It's so great to have you here. What I do in this show is I basically put on makeup and talk about whatever is on my mind. It's not a makeup tutorial, although you may learn a couple things if you hang around, but I will not be going through step by step exactly what I'm doing. However, if you are interested in the products I am using, I do list them in the description below. So, that being said, how are you today? It is, I'm not gonna lie, it's been a bit of a challenge for me today. I'm feeling very frustrated at this point with a certain local business that is very brazenly defying guidelines and mandates that are meant to keep the community safe. And it's very hard for me to see what they are doing because I know people personally who've had the virus and are struggling. And so it's really been hard for me to watch a local business in our community brazenly defying things that are in place that are meant to keep people safe. And I've struggled today, but I have decided that I am going to, instead of continuing to return fire via social media, I'm going to put energy into more positive things and hope for a better outcome. And in that vein, what is on my mind today is the story of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I'm not going to talk about another Christmas song, although I did very much enjoy diving into the history of O Holy Night. But no, I want to talk about the book, A Christmas Carol. This story has become a staple for people at Christmas. Some people feel like it's not really Christmas until you've watched at least one version of the story, which has been made into, it's been adapted into movies and television specials and plays so very many times. And a lot of people feel like if they want to celebrate Christmas, this story is part of it. And it's really taken on a life of its own. So let's get into why Charles Dickens wrote the story, what it's actually about, and what we can do with it today. So the story was published in 1843, and it became an instant hit. People loved the story. It became so well loved during the Victorian era. It was sort of considered like a new gospel. That's what it was referred to as, a new gospel. And it was a story that many believe Charles Dickens wrote simply as a means to generate income for his family. Like Bob Cratchit in the story, Charles Dickens was a man who had a large family and not enough income necessarily to support that family comfortably. And he did write the story in part to generate income. However, there is more to it than that. He wrote the story and in response to a report he read regarding child labor in the UK. Now, most of this report, it was a government report, and he said that it left him, I can't remember offhand the word he used, but it left him stricken, is what he said. In this report, which came out in 1843, it was comprised mostly of interviews with children who were being used as laborers. Now, in our modern 2020 way of thinking, it is just the idea of using children as laborers in manufacturing is just unthinkable to us. We would never consider doing that. We would recognize it as, you know, completely inappropriate and a horrifying prospect. But back in 1843, you have to understand, and I'm not making excuses for them, but I was wondering, how did child laborers become a thing in the first place? Because that's so far removed from where we are today, at least in the United States. There are still severe issues around the world with child labor, but that's a whole other topic. But in 1843, they were in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And what the Industrial Revolution did was it made manufacturing of goods much easier by making ways to do it via machine, which meant that more goods could be produced in a much more efficient way than what you might be able to achieve, or definitely what you would be able to achieve in like smaller businesses, in businesses that made things by hand. The Industrial Revolution meant that goods could be produced at an unprecedented rate. It also meant that there was an abundance of laborers moving in from the countryside to the various central manufacturing locations and looking for work. Now, what manufacturers realized was there was no shortage of laborers. However, they also realized that children could work for the lowest wages. So what ended up happening was a lot of children were employed to do things like sew dresses for the middle class people who were suddenly able to, they had purchasing power. So they would hire these usually young girls to sew clothing in mass quantities to be sold to the growing middle class. They also used children to do things like shuttle coal in subterranean tunnels. I've heard stories that, children were being used to help repair parts on machines that were too small for adults to conveniently access. So they would send children in there to address situations with these machines. They would also use children in, it was kind of the precursor to the assembly line. And they would have these children, for 10, 12, up to 16 hours a day, doing the same thing, gluing a piece or hammering a nail or whatever the case might be, sewing one piece of a garment over and over again, 10, 12, 16 hours a day. It's important to understand this was not the exception. This was the rule. This was a common practice in 1843. Children were at times essentially literally being worked to death. I mean, it was accidents that claimed the lives of these children were not entirely uncommon, and it was just an accepted norm. Well, when Charles Dickens read this report that the government in England had put forth regarding child labor, he was horrified and heartbroken. He had children of his own, and his wife was expecting another child, and he loved his children and couldn't imagine any of them, even in the dire financial straits they were in, being sent off to perform these tasks. Now, one of the sources for these child laborers was the poorhouses or the workhouses. And the conditions of workhouses were abysmal. During that time, it was believed that helping poor people would only enable them to stay poor. It wasn't going to give them any motivation to improve their lives. So the theory was, if getting help was made such a miserable experience, if it was made a terrible enough experience, people wouldn't reach out for help. That somehow shaming poor people was going to basically shame them out of poverty. And that's an idea I think that still you know, people still cling to today. They think if you shame poor people enough, I guess they'll just suddenly not be poor anymore because their shame generates income. I'm not sure what the logic is there. But there is this idea, back then and still today, that poor people are poor because they are lazy and immoral people, and they don't deserve to be helped. Instead, they deserve to be made as uncomfortable as possible in their poverty so that they will have a stronger motivation to improve their lot in life. So the idea of workhouses during the Victorian era in the UK was not only an accepted idea, but it was seen as sort of like the morally superior idea. In fact, there was a reverend, let me look up his name for you, because as per usual, I don't have these facts memorized. Reverend Thomas Malthus, I think is how you pronounce his name. He discouraged people from even intervening when families were hungry, when individuals were hungry due to their poverty, because he believed that if they were fed, that it would lead to an increase in population. There would be like an overpopulation. That sentiment is reflected in the story of A Christmas Carol when Mr. Scrooge says that if people are going to die, then they better go about doing it and decrease the surplus population. That was a direct reflection of the sentiments of the time. So when Charles Dickens was reading all of this, it shook him to his core, and he wanted to respond. His original intention had been to write a pamphlet that was going to be entitled An Appeal to the People of England on behalf of the poor man's child. His idea was just simply to write and distribute a pamphlet. However, as he began writing this, he decided that it would be better to tell a story than to simply write a pamphlet that was essentially going to be a very Charles Dickens rant on how England handled its poor. So he wrote this story. And as I said, this story became wildly popular right away. And what he had to say about the poor in his story, and how it should be handled, or yeah, how the poverty should be addressed in the culture, or in society rather, was interesting, because Charles Dickens rejected notions of Marxist solutions that were being presented, or socialist solutions. He presented some very different ideas regarding how to handle the poor. And we will get into the specifics of that in a few minutes, but it started with him humanizing the poor. And I've been reading the book over I started reading it last night. I'm almost done with it today. And by the way, how many of you have ever actually read the book? Because it's very, very good. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to get a copy and read it, because the writing is spectacular and it's so warm and so inviting. I've watched screen adaptations of the story so very many times, and I do have a favorite. I like the one with George C. Scott. That's my favorite so far. But I've never read the whole story, and I started reading it, and I didn't want to put it down. It was just so beautifully written. So if you've not read it yet, I strongly encourage you to. But one thing that really strikes me in the writing is the way Charles Dickens humanized those who are in poverty. I think even today, it's very easy to dehumanize people who are facing challenging situations like poverty. I think that there are, stereotypes still abound, unfortunately. Gotta take care of something here. And unfortunately, those stereotypes contribute to a lot of the, we'll say, unfortunate handling of people in poverty. Because there are so many stereotypes regarding people in poverty and how they got there and what they are doing while they're in that situation, etc. and so forth, it's very difficult to come up with real viable solutions to the problem of poverty and how it should be handled. And so just as in Charles Dickens' day, there are a lot of theories that abound regarding how to handle poverty that have nothing to do with actually addressing the causes of poverty itself, and instead operate on stereotypes, like the stereotype that women who are in poverty and have more babies are just doing it to collect more money. Let me tell you, as a parent, having kids is expensive, and I cannot think of anybody. I mean, most people are not going to say, hey, you know what's really my ticket to financial freedom? Having more kids. No, kids are expensive. It's ludicrous to think that people are out there having babies so they can collect more money. Do people do that? I'm sure they do. Do enough people do that it should be a lasting stereotype and an aspersion cast on all mothers who are in poverty? No, not by far. But these are ideas that have been around for a long time. I mean, this book, Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843, and as I was reading up on, the history behind the story, I was really sadly surprised to find that so many ideas that were present in 1843 are still present today. The idea of the workhouses was not to help people. It was to make them so objectively miserable in their poverty that they would do anything they could to improve their situation. In fact, workhouses were so awful that people sometimes preferred to just stay on their own and die rather than go to a workhouse where they were allegedly being helped. Also keep in mind, like today, workhouses were full of people who were chronically ill or mentally ill. And just like today, those who are chronically ill or mentally ill suffered the most because resources to address those problems continue to be scarce. And in 1843, the problem was significant enough that workhouses were filled primarily with the chronically ill and mentally ill. And today, the majority of people who are in poverty deal with one or both of those things. So these are problems that have been with us for a very, very long time. And Charles Dickens' story really challenges people to consider what we're doing. I'm going to read to you his dedication in the book, and then I'm going to read a couple passages to you just to give you an idea of what Charles Dickens had on his mind when he wrote this. So his dedication says, I endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Your faithful friend and servant, Charles Dickens, December 1843. So from the outset, it's clear that he's wanting to bring what he referred to as a sledgehammer to some of the ideas that were present in the day that he was writing this. In the very first chapter of the book, he gets right to it. So this is Ebenezer Scrooge speaking to the ghost of Jacob Marley. He says to him, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge. And this was after Jacob Marley had explained the chains that he was wearing. He had explained those to Scrooge. "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." So right away, Charles Dickens does not mess around. He gets right down to it and makes very clear what his intentions are with the story he is telling. What I find so interesting is so much of the affection people hold for this story is affection that is given only at Christmas. But if you read the story, it becomes evident pretty early that he did not intend for this to just be a story that people cherish at Christmas. He was talking about things that he believed had application year-round. So if he didn't have Marxist solutions, if he rejected those which were being spoken of at the time, or socialist solutions which were also being spoken of at the time, what did he do? What was his proposed solution? Well, he had the radical idea, and unfortunately it's still considered a radical idea, that employers needed to take care of their employees, that it was actually the job of an employer to make sure that their employees were well looked after. In the United States, I'm not going to attempt to speak for other countries because I don't know, but I know that in the United States, the sentiment commonly is, if you don't like it here, go find a job somewhere else. Essentially saying, I can treat my employees like garbage, I can pay them low wages, I can offer no benefits, and if they don't like it, they can just go find another job somewhere else because I can guarantee I can find someone to take their place. This is a very common approach used by employers in the United States. And if you doubt that, all you have to do is look at the number of full-time employed people who are still having to utilize various social welfare safety nets because their employer doesn't pay them enough. And that should not be. So first of all, Charles Dickens challenged the notion that employers were somehow above their employees and did not need to treat their employees as human beings. He challenged the idea that employers were simply resources. And that was a common thought back then, and it's still a common thought today. In 1843, when this was written, though, keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, there was an abundance of people who wanted to work. And there was an abundance of people who were willing to take whatever jobs they could. Because in the 1840s, times were extremely tough in the UK. And it had the nickname the Hungry 40s for a reason. So you have all of these people who are in poverty or on the brink of poverty. And they're just getting what jobs they can. They're doing whatever they can to keep out of those dreaded workhouses. And if that means taking a job where life and limb are literally at risk and your employer doesn't really care that much what happens to you, but at least it's a paycheck, that's what you're going to do. And during the Industrial Revolution, and unfortunately oftentimes still today, employees were just seen as like a cog in the machine. They were just one more part of the whole manufacturing process. They weren't seen as human beings. They weren't seen as, you know, an asset to be well taken care of. They were simply seen as just one more part of the manufacturing process. And if something happened to them, that's okay. There are more people who can step up and take over. So Charles Dickens, his really quite radical idea was humanize your employees. Understand that they are no better and no worse than you. Treat your employees the way you would want to be treated as an employee, which even today, unfortunately, is still a wild idea. Charles Dickens, as I said, believed that the employer had an obligation to their employee, not just a nice idea, not just a thought, but had an obligation to their employee to look after them, and not only them, but also their families. Now, there are a lot of employers who believe that it is not their job to make sure their employees are taken care of. The idea is, I give you a paycheck, and if you can't manage on what I give you, then find an additional job or go work somewhere else. And that is the unfortunate attitude that is held by many. Now, in the book, and I'm not going to get into Scrooge's story a lot because I think that people are familiar enough with his story that I really don't need to do that. You know, I don't need to get into that. He was a miserly old man whose primary interest was making money. Now, in the last few pages of the book, Scrooge says to Bob, "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob." So, what Charles Dickens suggested was not more social safety nets. It was not temporary fixes. It was long-term solutions to an ongoing problem. And I think that sometimes, a lot of times, that's what's missing from discussions of how to address the issue of poverty, is a lot of the suggestions that are made, might help if I blended this first, a lot of the suggestions that are made are short-term solutions, or they're solutions that disappear once a person makes a certain amount of income. And that's not really a solution at all, is it? If it's something that can be taken away from you if you are too successful in lifting yourself out of the situation that you're in, I don't really see that as a good solution. I've experienced that in my own life where I've been in need of help. In fact, in many ways, I'm there right now. I've been in need of help to be able to move my life forward, but I make too much money to be eligible for any of the safety nets that are there, and yet I don't make enough to actually go forward. And that's the situation many people find themselves in. So what Charles Dickens suggested was basically make sure people have enough to live on every day, not just at Christmas, not just when you're feeling charitable, but all year round. Make sure people have enough, which in 2020 is still seen as a somewhat revolutionary idea, which blows my mind. So this book, A Christmas Carol, beloved Christmas story though it is, it was never, in my mind, intended to be entirely about Christmas. It was intended to be, from what I can tell, a challenge to people who think that short-term solutions like charity at Christmas is enough to address a very serious problem and enough to really fix anything. He is saying it's really not. And he challenged so many ideas regarding poverty, regarding relationships between the employer and the employee, and what's beneficial versus what's economically sound. And those can be two different things. It might make sense for an employer to pay their employees minimum wage and still expect decent work out of them. But is it right, and is it a mutually beneficial relationship? I don't think it is. I think that people who are working deserve to have a livable or a living wage. They deserve a wage they can actually make a life with. And it's not an acceptable solution to say that people should be willing to work 2, 3, 4 jobs to be able to get by. What's very interesting to me, talking about this in 2020, is we're going through a time when the things we normally can count on, or even then we couldn't count on them, but things that people will say we should be able to count on, that's a better way to say it, is not really an option. A lot of the jobs that people could get to get by are not available. A lot of the solutions people have proposed for apparently hundreds of years now as a means for people to end their own poverty, those things are not available. And so this year is challenging everyone who has these very simplistic ideas of what poverty is and how it happens to really examine, or at least if they're a decent human being who wants to grow, they will stop and examine what a real solution looks like. It's not a stopgap. It's not something that can be taken away if a person becomes too successful in lifting themselves out of poverty. It's not bootstraps mentality that says, well, if you were a better human being, you wouldn't be poor in the first place. None of that works. And this year, we're finding out that poverty really is not a matter of being a hard worker and being a good and moral person. You know, I'm sorry, I should say escaping poverty is not a matter of those things, because we have a lot of good, hardworking people who have lived decent lives, who are finding themselves in impoverished situations this year due to circumstances entirely beyond their control. And this has been a year, I'm hoping, in which people are beginning to understand that poverty is more often than not a matter of personal choices that people made. A lot of times people are in poverty because of situations, you know, a catastrophe that happened in their lives that left them in that position. And once you're in that position, it's very difficult to get out of it. It is not as easy as just working harder. Because if that was the case, a lot of people who are in poverty would no longer be there. I'm going to finish up what I'm doing, and then I'll be right back with some final thoughts. So please hold. All right, I am back. So Charles Dickens really wanted to make the point in his book that you should not mistake the good fortune of opportunities and certain situations that you were either, you had the good fortune of being born into or that happened to come your way, with a reflection of your worth. And it was an important point to drive home, because then as now, so many people considered a person's, you know, financial situation and their standing in society as an indication of their worth as human beings. And he really wanted to make the point that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're incredibly wealthy or if you're one of the poorest of the poor. You're no better or no worse than anyone. We're all human beings, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And if you are someone who is in the position of having employees, or, you know, you have the ability to be helpful to those employees, you have an obligation to do that. Now, as I mentioned a little bit ago in the beginning of this video, there are a lot of people right now who are doing a lot of things in the name of Christmas. They are conducting themselves in a way that puts others at risk and disregards the potential impact on their community regarding the choices that they're making. And this isn't just businesses doing it. It's individuals who are choosing to participate in the things that businesses are doing, who are applauding these businesses, who are saying that, you know, my joy at Christmas is worth more than your safety. So in the book A Christmas Carol, when he is with the ghost of Christmas present, Scrooge says, "Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least that of your family." "There are some upon this earth of yours," returned the spirit, "who make claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our name, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us." Now, I'll leave it to you to decide in whose name these things are being done regarding the modern day occurrences, you know, during 2020 specifically, and what responsibility they bear for what comes next. Because we know that if certain guidelines are not followed, a very bad year is going to become an even worse year for a lot of people. And there are a lot of businesses and individuals alike who are doing things in the name of either a season or a person or a deity that they think gives them the authority to do this. And I just challenge you to ask, and to maybe even directly challenge them, in whose name are you actually doing this? What does A Christmas Carol mean for us? I think a lot of the challenges that are presented in A Christmas Carol still stand today. Unfortunately, even though workhouses are a thing of the past, we still have a lot of institutions and systems in place that keep people in poverty. There is still the notion that people can be shamed out of their poverty. There is still the idea that people are in poverty because it's a reflection of their moral character rather than a reflection of circumstances that more often than not they had no control over. I think too, especially in 2020, the message of A Christmas Carol is you don't have to have all the trappings of a very commercialized Christmas for the spirit of Christmas. Whether that spirit to you is one of generosity, whether it reflects, in your belief it's about the birth of Christ, abundance of kindness, grace towards others, whatever it means to you. And even if it's not Christmas, if it's a different holiday you celebrate at this time of year, whatever it means to you, it can still hold that meaning, even if we don't do all the things we normally do at Christmas. Christmas is not about having huge get-togethers and having money to spend on gifts and, making sure that we make all the same memories every year. Have that Christmas photo with our family every year so we can see the changes over time. To me, when I read the book, his message was pretty clear that, yes, what we do at Christmas is important. But more than that, what we do at Christmas should be sowing seeds that will reap fruit all year long, not just at Christmas. So I know this year is different. I know a lot of family gatherings are not going to happen. And I understand that having a Christmas celebration with your loved ones over Zoom is not the same thing as having them in person. I understand that the holidays just look different this year for a lot of people. And I know that's hard. I know that. I'm not dismissing how difficult that is and how emotionally draining this year has been. But when I was reading A Christmas Carol last night and then again this morning, the message I got from the story was we need to be acting in such a way that all year long people are taken care of, not just at Christmas. And this year, when we're dealing with so many uncertainties, we are in the middle of a pandemic, we are doing our best to keep ourselves safe, and a lot of us have been doing that since the beginning. There's no need to throw it all out the window over a holiday and put yourselves and others at risk. It is better to do this safely, better to conduct yourself in a way that is beneficial, that is most beneficial and most prudent for yourself and your community than it is to behave recklessly in the name of a season or in the name of a savior and just hope for the best. Because I don't think that any holiday should become about making your joy and your fun memories, your pictures with Santa, whatever the case might be, more important than the safety of your community, the safety of your family, and making sure that the people that you love are there to celebrate with you next Christmas, as much as it is within your power to do so. Making sure that those people that you love and want to celebrate with are still here next year during the holidays, so that when it's safe to celebrate with them in person, you can actually do that. It really grieves my heart to see how selfishly people are behaving in the name of the holiday season. And so my challenge is, if you love the story of A Christmas Carol, look a little deeper. If it's something that you consider a story just at Christmas time, look a little deeper than that and see the message that's there for the entire year. Because Charles Dickens wrote this story is a way to challenge people to be better, to do better, to think of their fellow human beings beyond being a machine, beyond being just another cog in the machine, to look at them and see the humanity. And I think that's something we really need right now, seeing the humanity in other people. I've been guilty of dehumanizing people. I think we've all done it. But I think there's a challenge right now when we're seeing how devastating that dehumanization can be in real numbers, as people are dying and people are being left with lifelong, potentially lifelong complications from a virus that never should have gotten this far out of control. It's so easy to dehumanize people and place blame and vilify people. But as I'm sitting here talking, I'm thinking that maybe if we remember the humanity, even of the people whose behavior we don't like, maybe that would be a catalyst for them behaving like decent human beings after all. It's just, maybe, I mean, that sounds very simplistic, and it is, but maybe that's a place to start. And I'm saying that to me as much as to anybody. So that is my very, have you ever heard of spaghetti conversations? And it's called a spaghetti conversation because if you look at a plate of spaghetti, you might start here, and then you have to wind and wind and wind your fork, and noodles come up from all over the plate, and then you have your spaghetti. It's kind of like a spaghetti conversation today, because I started in one place, and then I went all over the place, and now I'm ending up where I want to be. But that is my take, my brief history of the story of A Christmas Carol, and what it means to me, what it might mean to you, and really the challenge it is for us as a society to just do better. And I think we can do it. It's going to take some sacrifice and some determination, but I think we can do it. If you liked this video, please make sure and hit that like button. Please share. Please subscribe. You can also support future content on Patreon so I can keep bringing this spaghetti content to you. And I hope you're having a great day. I hope the rest of your day goes very, very well. Stay safe out there. Wear a mask if you have to go out. Practice good social distancing. We are going to get through this. I promise you, we are going to get through this. And we're going to get through it by remembering each other's humanity and doing our best to look out for one another, even the people we disagree with, which is a challenge for me, I'll freely admit. Don't shit on yourselves or anyone else. I do my best, but you know, we're all human and we all falter. And I will see you again next time. Bye.